We're almost a full month into 2021. How are you doing on that New Year's resolution? Whether it's going well or not, or you never set one, it's never too late to start. In fact, each year a large chunk of Americans' resolutions center around becoming better with money. This can mean saving and investing more, shopping less, or paying off lingering debt. But often it's not so easy to achieve these, especially after this past year. That's why it's important to start with specific goals and focus on the small wins. Even if you're setting aside $25 or $200 a month, it adds up over time. There's never going to be a perfect moment to start. And it's true that money doesn't bring happiness, but it can offer stability and flexibility in life.
The biggest long-term mistake I believe millennials and really any generation makes is failing to start investing early. And a lot of times it could be bad advice, or it could be because they feel like they have to get all the other things handled, whether that's paying off all their debt, building an emergency fund before they start investing. And unfortunately, particularly for millennials with the massive student loan debt burden, that might mean you don't start investing until your 40s.
That's Erin Lowry, a personal finance expert and author of Broke Millennial Talks Money: Scripts, Stories, and Advice to Navigate Awkward Financial Conversation. Lowry says that she meets many people who are only focused on finishing one task at a time, like paying off debt or student loans. Their rationale is that they'll be able to put aside more later on.
Just because you start earning more lately or later in life, it doesn't mean that your life is less complicated. In fact, life tends to get a little more complicated as we age. So just because you earn more in your 30s or 40s doesn't mean that you're going to have a lot of discretionary income to throw at different financial goals like investing. So I do feel strongly that it's really important for people, particularly to take advantage of an employer match 401k if it's an option. If not, to look into a traditional or Roth IRA and put, even if it's 1 or 2% of your salary, and even if that feels like a very small amount to you, just get started and take advantage of it early and be consistent.
A 401k, or an individual retirement account known as an IRA or a Roth IRA, are valuable tools in saving for retirement. They each offer different perks, such as tax incentives, compound interest, and the option to grow your money through investing, which is key.
When it comes to investing into a tax-advantaged account, particularly looking at a 401k or an IRA, those are available to you if you have taxable income. So for most working adults, that's an option. And particularly with a 401k with an employer match, that means that your money is basically already doubling. So if you or your employer matches you, let's say up to 4%, you put 4% in, they put 4% in, you have 8% going towards your 401k. Long term, do you need more than that going in? Sure. But in the short term, even a little something adds up, because compound interest does some of the work for you when it comes to your money when it's invested. And stashing your money away into even a high yield savings account is not going to keep up with inflation long term. So in the end of the game, you're effectively losing money if you look at it over decades, as opposed to putting it into the stock market and having your money do some of the work for you and growing and compounding for future use.
Lowry notes that on average, the stock market produces a return of 6 to 7% on investments over several years. Compare this to a high-yield savings account, which at current rates offers between 0.5% to 1% back in interest. This type of account can be good for certain scenarios, like an emergency savings fund where the money can be pulled out at a moment's notice. But what qualifies as a true emergency?
It is really important to recognize that that is money that you only want to be touching in the case of tire blows out on your car, something happens to your home, your dog eats a bag of brownie mix and has to get rushed to the vet. These moments in life that pop up, but that are actual emergencies. And for the amount, I'll tell you, 2020 really changed the game, in my opinion, in terms of how much we should advise people have. And I say that because there are people who are still out of a job from last March. So we're closing in on a year, and traditional advice is 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. And at this point, we're way beyond that. So one is to really think critically about the vulnerability of your job and trying to analyze there what makes you feel safe. For me personally, I'm going to aim to have at least a year's worth of living expenses in cash, which sounds huge. And it's something I'm slowly working towards, but it's something that makes me feel safe after we saw what happened in 2020.
To clarify, this emergency fund should only cover the basic essentials required to get by each month. Everything outside of bare-bones spending must be cut. Past this, sorting out retirement is another top priority. Lowry says that a common blunder she sees is the assumption that money is automatically accruing through investment.
I actually have someone that I know that happened to just last week. She messaged me with a screenshot of her IRA and said, everybody's been talking about how the stock market has done so well lately, but I don't really feel like I've seen any movement. And she hadn't, because her money had just been sitting in a cash management account inside of her IRA, and she never had actually picked investments. So it had stayed pretty stagnant all the way through 2020, where, as we know, was very tough financially for so many people. But the stock market, minus a dip kind of early in the year, ended up doing very well. So a lot of people saw great returns on their investments. And that's just a really classic example of something that happens. It feels that almost any time I talk, especially on Instagram, about go today and check to make sure that your money's not sitting in cash, at least one person will message me and go, oh my gosh, it's been sitting in cash for 5 years. And that's a significant amount of time that you can lose on building that money. So that's one of the reasons I really harp on that.
Each plan is different, so talk to your employer or brokerage firm to find out all of the different options and how to maximize contributions.
An easy way to do that in the beginning is to look at a target date fund, sometimes called a life cycle fund or an all-in-one fund. And that's sort of a one-size-fits-all solution, and it's tied to an approximate year you'd retire, let's say 2055. But the advantage of it is that it makes sure that your money is invested, and you can always get in there and play around with it and make it more customized to you in the future as you become more knowledgeable with investing.
There's no better way to build wealth than through investment. Lowry argues that the term saving for retirement is outdated.
We actually use the wrong language when we talk about retirement. The common vernacular is saving for retirement, and that's actually incorrect. We are investing for retirement.
Financial well-being means diversification. It can feel overwhelming or limiting at first to create new savings or retirement accounts and spread out income. However, these steps are paving a way for your future self. Once this infrastructure is in place, it's easy to keep expanding and learning.
Now, once you have a stronger financial base, putting on that financial oxygen mask, you've paid off any credit card debt, you're in a good place with your student loans, you've got your emergency savings fund, that's when we can look into more of what we call taxable investing. So investing outside of accounts for retirement. And that's really the basis that you need in order to start building real wealth. It's very hard to save your way to big financial goals like having $1 million. It's hard to save your way there, but it's much easier to invest your way to that goal.
There are many options out there when it comes to investing outside of retirement. Today, mobile investing apps like Robinhood or Acorn are very popular. But Lowry again recommends diversification.
I do think that it's really important that that's not the only method that you're using, that you also look at some of the more traditional brokerages and that you know and understand that just kind of the gamified versions of whether it's rounding up your spare change or what have you really isn't enough. And you need to be putting more than $5 a month in, especially if you're paying a fee like $1 a month. I know it sounds small, but if you're only investing $5 a month, that $1 a month is going to eat away at pretty much all of your returns. So if you're using a micro-investing app, and I agree that it's a great way to kind of learn and play around in a kind of low barrier to entry way. However, I would recommend to be putting in a minimum of $25, preferably more like $50 a month, and that's money that you're comfortable putting away into investments in order to make sure that you are receiving a return and that the fee isn't just eating away the money that you could be earning.
There's a lot of contradicting information out there, but the important part is to get started on creating a base network for growing your money so it works for you rather than the other way around. To learn more about this topic, our guest, Erin Lowry, and her book, Broke Millennial Talks Money, Scripts, Stories, and Advice to Navigate Awkward Financial Conversation, head to viewpointsradio.org. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price. Coming up on Viewpoints.
So upon first looking at the programs, parents are oftentimes and understandably tricked into believing this is a safe environment, but what goes on beyond those doors is a far different story.
The darker side of inpatient youth rehabilitation. Then,
it was a real struggle for investigators before they were able to team up with forensic scientists.
The birth of the American CSI. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Viewpoints is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.